when Kara Jennings switched on her flashlight in the basement of a wing that officially did not exist. The beam landed on the face of a man strapped to a hospital bed, a man the state of Louisiana had declared dead 11 months ago. His eyes were open, but they did not see her, because whatever dripped through that IV line had stolen everything behind them. 3 minutes from now, they would come for her, and everything she had built in 28 years would collapse like wet cardboard. 3 days from now, her name would be in every newscast from New Orleans to Washington, but she did not know that yet. All she knew was the smell of antiseptic and urine, and the soft, mechanical beeping of machines keeping ghosts alive in the dark. To understand how a prison guard making $19 an hour uncovered a scheme involving a warden, a pharmaceutical giant, and 3 judges, you need to go back 3 months to a morning in August when the Louisiana heat could melt your will to live. That was the day she first looked into the eyes of the man the entire state called a monster and felt nothing even close to fear. Before we go there, I need you to do something, because this story will make you question every institution you have ever trusted. Drop a comment right now telling me who you think the real monsters are behind bars or behind desks. Then subscribe, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone expected. 3 months earlier, Kara Jennings pulled her 12-year-old Honda Civic into the gravel parking lot of Blackwater Correctional Facility and killed the engine. The building sat like a concrete tumor on the edge of the Louisiana bayou, surrounded by razor wire that glinted in the August sun. She had driven 40 miles from Grayfield, where her mother was braiding her daughter Lily's hair and packing her tiny inhaler into a pink backpack. $19 an hour plus medical insurance. That was the price of Kara's dignity, and she had agreed to pay it without negotiation. 2 tours in Afghanistan as military police had taught her that every building has a personality, and Blackwater's personality was predatory and patient. The humidity wrapped around her throat like a hand as she stepped out, and the swamp exhaled something ancient and rotting from beyond the tree line. She straightened her new uniform shirt, still creased from the package, and noticed her hands were steady, which surprised her because last night the nightmares had come back with full surround sound. A corrections officer with a clipboard stood at the intake gate, and he looked at her the way you look at a stray dog approaching traffic. He checked her name and said 4 words that would rearrange her entire life. "You have been assigned Block D." Nobody told her what Block D was during orientation week, and nobody told her during the 2-hour defensive tactics refresher either. She asked 3 different officers and got 3 different versions of the same non-answer delivered with the same tight smile and quick subject change. The older guards called it the vault, and when they said it, their voices dropped half an octave, like they were naming something that might hear them. Block D sat at the far eastern edge of the compound, past the laundry facility, past the generator building, past the point where the security cameras conveniently stopped working. It was the original solitary confinement wing, built in 1974, from poured concrete that sweated moisture in summer and grew black mold in winter. The hallway leading to it smelled like bleach layered over something that bleach was never meant to cover, and the fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency. Only one inmate was housed there now, and the entire wing existed to contain him like a cathedral built to hold a single cursed relic. His name was Marcus Reeves, age 34, convicted 6 years ago for the double murder of Harold and Delia Carlton, a retired couple from Baton Rouge. The media had given him a title that stuck like tar: the Monster of Baton Rouge, and every guard at Blackwater treated that title like gospel truth. Senior Officer Ray Sandoval walked her to Block D on her first morning, and he moved through the corridors like a man navigating a minefield from memory. He was 52 years old, with 22 years at Blackwater carved into the deep lines around his mouth and the permanent squint of his left eye. He called inmates by their numbers, never their names, and he spoke to Kara without looking at her, which she recognized as a dominance gesture. Ray stopped at the steel door that separated Block D from the rest of the world and punched in a code she was not authorized to see yet. The door opened with a hydraulic sigh, and the temperature dropped 5 degrees, as if the building itself was warning her to turn around now. He handed her a laminated card with emergency protocols and pointed down the corridor toward the single-occupied cell at the very end of the hall. "Remember 3 things, Jennings," he said. Voice flat as a slab. Do not touch the glass. Do not believe a word he says, and do not be here after dark." Then Ray Sandoval turned and walked away, and the steel door sealed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid, and Kara was alone with the monster. She walked the 60 feet to his cell, and every step echoed twice, because the empty cells on either side acted like resonance chambers amplifying her. The cell at the end had a reinforced glass front instead of bars, which meant whoever designed this enclosure wanted to see the thing inside it clearly. Marcus Reeves sat on the floor with his back against the far wall, and his long, thin fingers were moving in the air, like he was playing a piano that only he could see. He was tall and thin with deep, set eyes that tracked her approach the way a deer watches a hunter deciding if the distance is still safe. Kara stopped 2 feet from the glass and introduced herself using the standard script: name, rank, assignment, and the offer to address any immediate medical or facility concerns. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He did not stop those fingers from playing their invisible keys across his drawn-up knees. She stood there for 4 minutes and 12 seconds because her military training had taught her that silence is a negotiation tactic, and patience always wins. The fluorescent tube above his cell flickered once, and in that half-second of dimness, she saw something on the wall behind him. Dozens of tiny scratched lines grouped in sets of 5. 6 years of days, counted by a man the world had decided to forget. And something about those marks made her stomach tighten in a way she had not felt since Kabul. 3 weeks passed, and Marcus Reeves did not say a single word to Kara Jennings. Not one syllable across 21 8-hour shifts. She brought his meals through the slot and collected the trays and noted his condition in the daily log using the same 4 words: "Inmate stable, no concerns." At night in her converted cell in the staff housing wing, she would call Lily and listen to her daughter describe kindergarten drawings of purple horses and houses with too many windows. The distance between those 2 worlds, Lily's purple horses and Marcus's scratched tally marks on concrete, made something ache behind her ribs every single night. She started reading his file during breaks, not because she cared, but because the silence was becoming a sound she could not stop hearing in her head. The file described a sociopath of extraordinary intelligence who had manipulated social services clients and murdered 2 elderly people for reasons the prosecution called purely sadistic and incomprehensible. But the psychological evaluation attached to the file had no signature page, and the forensic evidence summary referenced an appendix that did not exist anywhere in the folder. On the 22nd day, Kara walked to his cell, and Marcus Reeves looked directly at her for the first time, and his eyes were not empty at all. He said 7 words that landed like stones dropped into still water. "They put you here for a reason." She told herself it meant nothing because inmates say cryptic things to rattle new guards. It is page 1 of the manipulation handbook she studied at the academy. But that night, she lay on her thin mattress staring at the ceiling, and those 7 words kept rearranging themselves into shapes that looked like a door she was not supposed to open. The next morning, Marcus spoke again, and this time he gave her more. A full sentence delivered in a voice rusty from years of silence and disuse. "They want you to see a monster," he said, "because it is easier when they move me, and nobody asks where I went or what happened to me." Kara's training told her to log the statement and report it to her supervisor and forget it before lunch, but her body did something her training could not override. Her pulse stayed level, her breathing stayed even. and the part of her brain that had kept her alive through 2 combat tours sent a clear signal. This man is telling the truth. She did not know yet about the 23 names in the hidden medical files, or the terminated subjects, or the warden's deal with Viridian Pharmaceuticals. Or she did not know that the land where Harold and Delia Carlton once lived now held a secret wing full of people who officially no longer existed anywhere on Earth. But standing in front of that glass, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, she felt the same feeling she had felt in Afghanistan the moment before an ambush. The air getting heavy, the world getting quiet, and every cell in her body screaming that something terrible was about to reveal itself. That feeling saved her life in Kandahar province twice, and she had learned never to argue with it. The next morning, she arrived at Block D 14 minutes early and found something taped beneath her duty log. A yellowed index card with a 6-digit number written in pencil, so faint it was almost invisible. She recognized the format immediately because military police use the same numbering system for classified evidence logs. Marcus watched her find it through the glass, and his fingers stopped their invisible piano for the first time. He did not nod or speak or acknowledge the card in any way, but his eyes moved to the upper corner. Kara followed his gaze to the security camera mounted above the corridor and noticed the red indicator light was dark. The camera in Block D had been dead for at least 24 hours, and nobody had filed a maintenance report. Someone wanted a blind spot here, and that someone was not Marcus Reeves sitting behind reinforced glass. Kara slipped the index card into her boot and felt the war wake up inside her chest again. She spent her lunch break in the staff break room pretending to scroll her phone while her mind disassembled possibilities. The 6-digit number could be an inmate identification code or a file reference, or door combination, or nothing. TK Kinnan sat across from her, eating a gas station burrito and talking about his fantasy football team with the enthusiasm of someone who had never once questioned where he worked. She almost asked him about the dead camera, but something stopped her hand before it touched his shoulder. In Afghanistan, her unit had a phrase for the moment you realize your perimeter has been compromised from inside. They called it ghost in the wire, and the feeling was identical to what crawled up her spine now. TK caught her staring and grinned with hot sauce on his chin and asked if she wanted to grab beers after shift. She said maybe and smiled, and behind that smile, her brain was building a map of everyone she could not trust. The list was growing faster than the list of people she could, and that ratio terrified her more than anything. By the time she clocked out that evening, the index card in her boot felt heavier than her service weapon ever had. 3 days later, Kara found the courage to test the number against the archive terminal in the records office. She waited until the overnight skeleton crew reduced the administrative building to 2 guards and 1 sleeping clerk. The records office smelled like dust and toner and the particular staleness of information nobody wants found anymore. She typed the 6 digits into the search field, and the screen loaded a file that should not have existed. Your inmate transfer record for 1. David Allen Whitmore admitted to Blackwater Correctional 9 years ago for armed robbery with force. His file showed a standard transfer to a federal facility in Texas, dated 14 months after admission, with all signatures present. But the transfer authorization code belonged to a format that Louisiana Corrections had not used since 2008. Kara cross-referenced the receiving facility and found that Whitmore never arrived in Texas, never checked in, never existed there. A man walked into Blackwater 9 years ago, and the system swallowed him whole and printed a receipt saying he left. She should have stopped there, and every survival instinct she owned was screaming at her to close the terminal and walk away. Instead, she searched for the name in national databases using her old military police credentials that nobody had thought to deactivate. David Allen Whitmore had a mother in Shreveport who filed a missing persons report 8 years ago that went nowhere fast. He had a son who turned 18 last spring and posted a birthday message to a dead man on social media every single year. Kara stared at the screen and felt the room tilt sideways, the way it does when your brain receives information it cannot metabolize. She printed nothing because printers keep logs, but she photographed the screen with the cheap prepaid phone she bought for Lily. The timestamp on that photograph would later become Exhibit 14 in a federal investigation, but she could not know that yet. What she knew was that Blackwater had made a living man disappear and dressed the disappearance in paperwork so clean it fooled everyone. Everyone except a woman making $19 an hour who could not stop pulling threads because her broken brain treated every unanswered question like an active threat. Marcus spoke more after that day, as if he could sense through concrete and glass that something had shifted in her. He told her about his work as a social worker in Baton Rouge, visiting people the city preferred to forget entirely. He described the Carlton house with its wraparound porch and the jasmine that grew so thick it perfumed the whole road. Harold Carlton had been a retired surveyor who knew every property line in the parish by heart and memory. Delia made pecan pie that she left on the porch for the mail carrier every single Friday, without exception or failure. Marcus said he visited them because Harold was mentoring a recently released inmate who needed help reading property documents clearly. His voice cracked on the word documents, and he pressed his palms flat against the wall behind him, steadying himself. Then he said something that made Kara grip her duty belt until her knuckles went white beneath the skin. The Carltons refused to sell their land 3 times, and the 3rd time, the buyers sent men in uniforms, not suits. Kara began watching the facility at night from her staff housing window that faced the Eastern Service Road beyond the generators. On her 4th night of watching, she saw it, and the sight rewired everything she thought she understood completely. A white panel van with no license plates pulled through the service gate at 2:47 in the morning precisely. Dr. Nadine Chu stepped out carrying a silver medical case that caught the floodlight for exactly 1/2 second before darkness. 2 guards Kara did not recognize walked beside the van wearing Blackwater uniforms, but moving with military precision and synchronization. They unloaded something on a stretcher covered with a white sheet, and the shape beneath it was unmistakably human and breathing. The service gate closed, and the van disappeared down the Bayou Road like it had never existed at all tonight. Kara counted her own heartbeats because counting was what kept the panic attacks from swallowing her whole in Afghanistan. She reached 47 before her hands stopped shaking enough to write down the time and the details in her notebook. The next morning, Dr. Cho walked past her in the cafeteria and smiled pleasantly, and Kara smiled back perfectly. 2 women eating breakfast 6 feet apart, one hiding bodies, and the other hiding the fact that she knew about them. Remember that anonymous key card I mentioned, because this is where it changes everything Kara thought she understood. She found it in her locker on a Tuesday morning tucked inside her left boot, which meant someone had accessed her personal space. The card was blank white plastic with a magnetic strip and no markings or identification numbers printed anywhere on it. She knew it was either a trap designed to catch her snooping or a lifeline thrown by someone drowning in guilt. Either way, it was a test, and Kara Jennings had never once in her life walked away from a test. That night, she used the card on the archive room door, and the lock clicked open like it had been waiting for her. Inside, she found filing cabinets that the regular records office did not reference in any index or catalog or system. 23 manila folders each, labeled with a subject number, and inside each folder, a medical history that read like a horror novel. 3 of those folders ended with a single word stamped in red ink, and that word was terminated, and it did not mean released. She sat on the floor of the archive room with 23 folders spread around her like a paper graveyard. Each folder contained blood work results and dosage charts and clinical notes written in handwriting she recognized. Dr. Nadine Cho's precise small letters filled every page describing reactions to compounds with names Kara could not pronounce. 3 subjects had experienced what the notes called catastrophic neurological failure, and those 3 folders carried the red stamp. The other 20 folders described ongoing trials with notations updated as recently as last week by someone still breathing. Kara's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the specific rage that comes when math replaces suspicion with certainty. 23 human beings had been converted into laboratory equipment inside a facility funded by taxpayer money and federal contracts. She photographed every single page with the prepaid phone, and the shutter sound felt louder than gunfire in that room. But 23 folders answered one question while ripping open a dozen others that bled worse than the first. The biggest question was Viridian Pharmaceuticals, because their logo appeared on every dosage protocol sheet tucked inside the folders. Kara had seen that logo before on television commercials, where smiling families thanked science for giving them normal lives. The compound being tested was called VRD117, and the notes described it as an aggression suppression agent, targeting specific neural pathways. In plain language, they were trying to build a chemical leash for violent behavior, and they needed subjects nobody would miss. The irony hit her like a fist, because a company promising to make prisons obsolete was using prisoners as disposable rats. She returned every folder to its exact position, because disturbed dust patterns betray intruders faster than any camera ever could. The key card went back into her boot, and she walked to her quarters counting steps to keep the panic contained. That night, she did not sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red stamp bleeding through paper. Terminated is a word that sounds clinical until you realize it used to be a person with a mother in Shreveport. The next morning, Kara stood before Marcus Reeves, and for the first time, she pressed her palm against the glass. He stared at her hand for 11 seconds, then slowly rose from the floor and walked toward her like a man approaching. His fingers stopped their invisible piano, and he placed his palm against the glass opposite hers with only inches between them. The glass was cold, but something warm traveled through it anyway, defying every law of physics she had ever learned completely. He spoke quietly because volume was unnecessary when 2 people share the same frequency of desperation and truth. He told her the Carltons discovered survey markers on their land, placed by a company they had never authorized or contacted. Harold Carlton followed the markers and found construction equipment hidden beneath camouflage netting near the bayou's eastern bank overnight. He reported it to the parish office, and within 72 hours received a purchase offer 4 times his property value. When Harold refused for the 3rd time, Marcus saw 2 men wearing Blackwater corrections uniforms parked outside the Carlton house. Anna Marcus paused, and his jaw tightened, and Kara watched the tendons in his neck pull taut like bridge cables under strain. He said he called the Baton Rouge Police Department and filed a report naming Blackwater Correctional as a potential threat. 48 hours later, Harold and Delia Carlton were found dead in their kitchen, staged to look like a robbery. 72 hours after that, Marcus was arrested at his apartment with physical evidence that materialized from absolutely thin air overnight. His court-appointed attorney filed 0 motions, challenged 0 witnesses, and delivered a defense so incompetent it bordered on performance art. The jury convicted in 4 hours because the prosecution's star witness was a confidential informant who later vanished from every database. Marcus stopped talking and pressed his forehead against the glass until Starks, and Kara heard him exhale 6 years of accumulated silence. She understood now that Block D was not punishment, but storage, because Marcus Reeves was evidence that needed to stay buried. The monster was never inside this cell, and she had known that since the 22nd day, but now she had proof. That proof became poison inside her chest, because knowing the truth and deploying it are two entirely different wars altogether. She needed an ally, and her instincts pointed toward the one person who seemed safe enough to trust with everything. TK Kinnan had started the same week as her and shared the same overwhelmed newcomer energy that bonds people fast. She found him in the parking lot after shift change and told him about the dead camera and the night van carefully. She did not mention the folders or the key card because some part of her brain was still running threat assessment protocols. TK listened with wide eyes and nodded in all the right places and said all the correct words of outrage. He squeezed her shoulder and promised to watch the service road from his quarters and report anything unusual back to her. Kara drove home feeling lighter than she had in weeks because shared weight is supposed to be halved by the sharing. But she forgot the lesson Afghanistan taught her twice because the ghost in the wire always wears a friendly face. 24 hours later, Warden Daniel Croft invited Kara into his office for what he called a friendly check in conversation. His office smelled like leather and old paper, and the particular cologne worn by men who believe authority is a birthright. He offered her coffee from a French press and gestured toward a chair positioned deliberately lower than his own mahogany desk. On the wall behind him hung a framed letter from the governor and a photograph of him shaking hands with a senator. He asked about her adjustment period and her daughter's health, and he pronounced Lily's name correctly on the first attempt. That detail sent ice water through Kara's veins because she had never mentioned her daughter's name to anyone at Blackwater. Croft smiled the way a cottonmouth smiles before it opens wide enough to swallow something whole and alive and screaming. He said, "Kara, your daughter has asthma, and that is serious, and it would be terrible if she lost her insurance." Then he added, "or her mother," and the room temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space between those two words. She walked out of his office and past TK in the corridor, and he would not meet her eyes or turn his head. His gaze fixed on the middle distance like a soldier who has just followed an order he cannot undo or take back. Kara kept walking, because stopping would mean screaming, and screaming would mean they win, and she refuses to let them. The betrayal tasted like copper in her mouth, and the same taste she remembered from the day Sergeant Rivera sold their patrol route. Every person she had trusted in this building had either lied or been leveraged into becoming a weapon aimed at her. She reached Block D and stood before Marcus, and he read her face through the glass like reading a casualty report. "You told someone," he said, and it was not a question because he had watched this pattern destroy 3 guards before her. Kara nodded once and felt something inside her chest rearrange itself from fear into something harder and more dangerous entirely. She was done surviving, and the war she had been avoiding since August had just officially and irreversibly been declared right here.